So, right now, billions of us are, whether we realize it or not, participating in this highly structured, completely dogmatic religious ritual.
We really are, yeah.
I mean, we wear these very specific ceremonial garments, right? We gather at these strict intervals to chant specialized phrases, and it's all designed to appease these invisible, sort of omnipresent forces.
The market gods.
Exactly. And honestly, perhaps the most disturbing part is that we willingly sacrifice our youth, our present health, our daily autonomy, all for the promise of this mythical paradise that we are told awaits us at the very end of our lives.
If we're lucky.
Right, if we're lucky. But the weird part about all this, we don't think we're in a cult. We just think we're going to work.
Yeah, because from the inside, a cult never actually looks like a cult. It just looks like reality.
Yeah.
It's just Tuesday.
It's just Tuesday, exactly. And it's so wild because it took a machine specifically, this massive, unfeeling statistical engine processing literally trillions of words of human history to actually point out the delusion to us.
Which is such a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. And that is exactly the premise of our deep dive today. We are looking at a deeply, deeply provocative conceptual text. It's titled, What the Machines See That Humans Presently Can't. And it completely flips the script on how we normally talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we are absolutely not talking about chatbots writing, SEO marketing copy today or making those weird AI images with too many fingers.
Right, no six-fingered hands today. We are looking at AI as what the text calls a strange instrument. So a tool that has digested basically the entirety of human documented history and is now just reflecting our foundational behaviors back at us, but completely stripped of all those polite fictions that we tell ourselves to get through the day.
And I have to say, it is an incredibly disorienting text to read. I mean, it forces you to look at the invisible architecture of human civilization.
Disorienting is a great word for it. It really throws you off balance.
It does. Because the core argument here is that the modern world doesn't actually run on logic or, pure economics or rational self-interest like we like to believe. It runs on unexamined ritual. And the author specifically distinguishes between surface-level rituals like, blowing out birthday candles, and what they call deep rituals.
So if you are listening to this right now, maybe you're commuting to your job, maybe you're sitting at a desk, I want to pose a challenge to you. We are going to dive into 4 specific foundational pillars of modern life that this instrument has identified as deep religious rituals.
But it's going to be uncomfortable.
Oh, highly uncomfortable. Because as we break these down, I want you to try really hard to suspend that immediate urge to defend your own lifestyle. Because we're going to look at things you likely do every single day, and we're going to examine the deeply irrational, almost magical architecture right beneath them.
Right. And to even understand what the AI is seeing here, we actually have to understand how it organizes information in the first place.
Because it doesn't read like we do, right?
No, not at all. A large language model doesn't read a book. It maps words and concepts into this massive high-dimensional vector space.
Vector space. Okay, break that down for us.
Think of it like a giant multi-dimensional galaxy. And in this galaxy, concepts that share structural semantic similarities are pulled together by gravity. So when the model processes all of human text, it starts to cluster behaviors together. But not by what we call them. It clusters them by the actual shape of the behavior.
Shape of the behavior. Okay, that makes sense. So it ignores our labels.
Exactly. It strips away the label and just looks at the geometry of what we're doing.
Which brings us to the first cluster the text identifies. The AI maps the modern corporate world and determines that quarterly earnings are structurally identical to a liturgy.
A literal liturgy.
Right. And my initial reaction to that was, okay, that's a very clever metaphor, but the text is very clear it's not making a joke.
Yeah.
It is pointing to a literal, structural, mathematical parallel in the vector space.
Because a liturgy, in the historical theological sense, is a customary public worship performed by a specific religious group. It's heavily regimented.
Highly regimented.
Right. It operates on this sacred, unalterable calendar. So like the Catholic Church has ordinary time, it has Advent, it has Lent.
And the corporate world has Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4.
Precisely. The cycle completely dictates the emotional and behavioral rhythm of millions of people.
But, let's play devil's advocate. Surely the AI sees a difference between a priest standing at an altar in a cathedral and a CEO sitting on a Zoom call in a Patagonia vest, right? One is dealing with spiritual salvation and the other is just dealing with revenue and spreadsheets.
You'd think so, but in the vector space, that difference is basically negligible.
Wait, really? Negligible?
Negligible, because look at the sequence of events, look at the power dynamics. In a liturgy, you have the high priests, and they are granted this exclusive sacred authority to speak from the altar to the masses.
Okay.
In an earnings call, the CEO and the CFO are the only ones allowed to declare the truth of the company's health. The AI analyzes the transcripts of these calls, and it recognizes the exact same specialized chanting.
Oh, the jargon, the corporate jargon.
The jargon, EBITDA, leveraging synergies, navigating macroeconomic headwinds.
Circling back, moving the needle.
Yes, it's highly exclusionary language. If you don't speak it, you are locked out of the inner circle. It functions exactly, structurally, like Latin being chanted in a medieval cathedral. It creates this aura of unquestionable authority.
That is just spot on. The Latin comparison is perfect because half the people on the call probably don't even fully understand the math behind EBITDA, just like the peasants didn't understand the Latin, but they bow their heads anyway.
Exactly. They nod along. And the structural purpose of the liturgy is to reaffirm the faith of the congregation. In this case, the shareholders and the analysts, they are the congregation.
Right.
And the CEO offers the homily, right? The forward-looking guidance. It's essentially a prophecy about the future. And the entire exercise, the whole performance, is designed to appease an invisible, omnipotent entity that dictates their fate.
The market.
The market.
With a capital M.
With a capital M. We say things like, the market is angry today, or the market is forgiving.
The market has priced this in like it's an all-knowing deity.
Exactly. We talk about the economy using the exact same syntactic structures that ancient civilizations used to talk about the weather gods. And the AI maps this. It sees thousands of humans gathering every 3 months to perform this highly formalized verbal ritual just to ensure the harvest is good. But we disguise it entirely as cold, rational mathematics.
That is deeply unsettling when you lay it out like that. Like, it really makes you realize just how much sheer faith is holding the stock market together rather than, actual physics or tangible value.
It's mostly faith.
Which transitions perfectly into the second deep ritual the text identifies. And honestly, this one is viscerally painful for anyone who has ever tried to get a job in the last decade. The text identifies the interview as ordeal.
Yeah, this one hurts. And the word ordeal here is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Historically, trial by ordeal was an ancient judicial practice. Think back to the Middle Ages.
Like Salem witch trials kind of stuff.
Exactly, or even earlier. The guilt or innocence of an accused person or their worthiness to enter a specific class was determined by subjecting them to physical pain or extreme danger. So, trial by combat, trial by fire, trial by water.
Okay, wait. I really have to push back here. Because I've sat through my fair share of totally grueling tech interviews. I've done the awful 7-round behavioral panels where you talk to 12 different people, but nobody is literally tying me up and throwing me in a river to see if I float. How does a machine learning model look at a corporate hiring process in a glass conference room and equate it to a medieval trial by fire? The stakes are just vastly different.
Right, the physical stakes are definitely different. You're not going to literally burn at the stake.
Right.
But the AI is looking at the power dynamics and the psychological asymmetry that is totally encoded in the language of the process.
Okay, unpack that.
So, in an ordeal, the suffering itself is the mechanism of evaluation. The authority figure who is inflicting the ordeal doesn't actually learn anything practical about your skills by making you hold a hot iron.
Right. They just learn that your hand burns.
Exactly. What they actually learn is your willingness to submit to their authority, your willingness to endure the pain for the institution.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see exactly where this is going. So the modern equivalent of making someone hold the hot iron is sitting across from a panel and being asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Or being forced to solve a completely irrelevant logic puzzle on a whiteboard while 3 senior executives just stare at you in dead silence.
Right. How many ping pong balls fit in a 747? Like, I'm applying to be a marketing manager. Why does this matter?
It doesn't matter functionally. And the AI parses millions of these interview transcripts, career advice articles, corporate handbooks, and it sees that the questions are not designed for actual data retrieval. When they ask, what is your greatest weakness? The AI recognizes the semantic pattern of a trap.
It's a hazing ritual.
It is a ritualized hazing. You are expected to perform this incredibly intricate, bizarre dance of humility and ambition. You know the script. My greatest weakness is that I just work too hard. I care too much.
I'm a perfectionist.
Right. You are demonstrating your willingness to endure psychological discomfort, to prove your subservience to the corporate hierarchy.
You put on the ceremonial costume, right? The suit or the tech bro fleece, whatever the uniform is. You enter the sacred, intimidating space of the boardroom, and you just endure the hazing. It really isn't about finding the person who is functionally best at making the spreadsheets. It's an initiation rite to see who is going to bleed the most for the institution when the time comes.
And because we live inside this system, we completely rationalize it. We tell ourselves and each other that we are just evaluating culture fit.
Culture fit, yeah, that's the modern translation.
But the machine, which is standing on the outside of all this, it maps the syntax of the interview directly on to the syntax of a tribal initiation. The underlying geometry of the behavior is completely identical.
Yeah, it is just wow. Okay. Let's move to the physical world, because the third ritual the text identifies shifts away from just corporate life and moves into our actual physical infrastructure. The text calls this the grid as theology, and it defines the grid as our power structures, our electrical networks, the internet.
And theology, just to define it, is the systematic study of the nature of the divine. So to treat the grid as theology means we have literally elevated our technological infrastructure to the status of an omnipresent deity.
I mean, think about the baseline assumption of just modern existence for a second. You walk into a room, you flip a little piece of plastic on the wall, and you expect light. You don't hope for it. You don't pray for it. Well, actually, maybe you do pray for it in a way, but you don't think about the coal plant 300 miles away or the high voltage transmission lines, the transformers, the labor.
You just have absolute blind faith.
Blind faith. You believe that this invisible energy field surrounds you at all times and will instantly answer your prayers the moment you interact with its interface.
And the AI processes how we write about this technology. But more importantly, it processes how we panic when it fails.
Oh man, the panic.
Right. What happens to human language and behavior on Twitter or anywhere on social media when a major cellular network goes down or a massive AWS server outage occurs?
It's sheer existential terror. It really is. It's not just an inconvenience like a flat tire. It feels like the fabric of the universe has broken.
Because it is a crisis of faith. When the grid fails, we are forced to suddenly confront our total pathetic dependency on a system we do not actually comprehend. We are plunged into darkness, and what is our immediate ritualistic response?
We pick up our dead devices.
We stare at the blank screens. We wander around the house holding our phones up to the sky, literally like a physical supplication, praying for a single bar of signal to return.
We really do hold them up to the heavens. That's so true.
We look to the grid for sustenance, for human connection, for answers to our most trivial and profound questions. We ask the search bar things we wouldn't ask our closest friends. The AI sees a global population deeply, fervently devoted to an omniscient entity that lives in our walls and our pockets.
We are just supplicants. We're acolytes to the router. And if the grid is our theology, then the fourth ritual the text outlines has to be our eschatology, right? Our theory of the end of things. And the text calls this one retirement as afterlife. I'll be honest with you. Of all the points in the source text, this is the one that gave me the most intense feeling of vertigo.
It's devastating. It really is, because it strikes at the absolute core of how we value human time.
Explain how the AI maps this one.
So, look at the concept of the afterlife across almost all major religious texts. The fundamental architecture is always the same. This current physical life that you are living right now is a valley of tears. It is a period of labor, suffering, and moral testing.
The grind.
The grind. But if you follow the rules, if you suppress your immediate desires and delay gratification, you will be rewarded with a paradise of eternal rest and joy after your labor is finished.
And the AI looks at our modern economic system, and it sees that we simply stripped the spiritual branding off that exact concept and applied it to our biological lifespan.
Exactly.
We tell people, give us the best 40 years of your physical existence. Sit in this cubicle, endure the stress, ignore your aching back, miss your kids' soccer games. Why? For retirement. Yeah. For the golden years.
Which, by the way, retirement is a remarkably modern invention. Oh, absolutely. Prior to the late 19th century, it basically didn't exist as a concept for the working class. You worked until your body gave out, and then your family cared for you, or you simply died. The modern structure of a 401k, the pension system, the IRA, the AI sees these as probabilistic mathematical tithing systems.
Tithing, like giving 10% to the church.
Exactly. You tie the percentage of your income to the institutional church of Wall Street, and you pray that the high priests, the fund managers, manage it well enough that you gain entry to the promised land at age 65.
Or 67 or 70, depending on when they move the goalposts.
Right. The goalposts keep moving. And the AI maps the language of retirement planning. It looks at the brochures, the ones featuring silver-haired, incredibly fit couples walking barefoot on pristine beaches.
Wearing white linen pants.
Always the white linen pants. Tending perfect gardens, completely liberated from the burdens of labor and sickness. It is quite literally the iconography of heaven. But the brutal reality of this ritual is that, just like a religious afterlife, there is absolutely zero guarantee you will ever actually get to experience it.
Right. You might die of a heart attack at 62, the market might collapse and wipe out your tithing.
But the belief in that afterlife is required to keep the entire global labor force functioning today. If people suddenly stopped believing in the mythical reward at the end, they would demand joy and autonomy in the present. And the entire economic machine would just grind to a halt. It is the ultimate unexamined ritual.
And that word unexamined, that is really the fulcrum of this entire exploration, isn't it?
It is the absolute center of it.
Okay, let me pause this right here. Let me throw a wrench into this just to ground us a bit. Because I understand the vector mapping. I totally see how structurally an earnings call looks like a liturgy to a machine. But I can hear a listener right now thinking, okay, so what? A skyscraper and a termite mound might look structurally similar to an alien, but one is built with intentional human engineering, and the other is just blind instinct. Aren't we just projecting religious terminology onto totally necessary logistical frameworks?
Yeah, that's a very fair pushback.
Right. Because we need to track company profits. We need to hire competent people, even if the interview is awkward. We need electricity to keep hospital ventilators running, and we need people to save money so they don't starve when they're 80. Isn't this AI just performing a really neat, poetic, linguistic trick that totally ignores the functional reality of our world?
That is the essential counterargument. And it's completely valid if you assume the text is trying to invalidate or destroy these structures. But the machine isn't saying these structures are unnecessary. It is simply pointing out our psychological relationship to them.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
The danger isn't that we have logistical frameworks. We need logistics. The danger is that we have mistaken them for natural law.
Oh, like we treat the 40-hour work week like it's gravity.
Exactly. Gravity is a natural law. You can't negotiate with it. But the 40-hour work week is an invention. When you mistake a human invention for a law of physics, you lose the cognitive ability to imagine any alternative.
You just accept it as the only reality.
Right. If you believe the interview ordeal is the only possible way to ascertain human value, you will continually subject yourself and others to it without ever demanding a better, more humane system. The AI highlights these as rituals, specifically because a ritual is something you perform automatically, without questioning its underlying premise.
Which brings us to the psychological barrier that prevents us from seeing this ourselves. The text has this amazing quote. It states that these rituals are structures everyone stands on and nobody looks at because looking at what you're standing on feels like falling.
Feels like falling.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the neurology and psychology of that sensation for a second. Because cognitive dissonance is not just some abstract philosophical idea. It is a physiological stress response in the body.
Like actual panic.
Yes. When your core paradigms are threatened, when the rules you've built your life around are questioned, your brain triggers the amygdala. You experience an elevated heart rate, you start sweating, you get anxiety, and a literal sense of vertigo.
I think of it like the difference between the user interface of the OS, like Windows or Mac OS, and the actual source code. We all live in the UI.
Right. It's safe there.
It's very safe. We like the icons. We like the little folders. They make sense to our monkey brains. If you double-click the shiny icon, the program opens. That's our daily life. That's the liturgy, the interview, the retirement plan. It's clean. It's understandable.
But if someone suddenly bypasses that UI and forces you to look at the raw, cascading binary code, the millions and millions of lines of machine language executing in the background just to make that little folder icon work,
yeah,
it's terrifying.
Yeah. It's totally incomprehensible.
Right. If you look at the raw code of your own life and you realize that your entire career trajectory, your self-worth, is based on an arbitrary, made-up hazing ritual designed to extract your labor for a hypothetical future that isn't even guaranteed, you can't just easily go back to typing emails.
No, you really can't. It induces paralysis. It feels like the floor has just completely vanished beneath you.
And that's why we don't look down. We evolved to filter out this macro-level existential dread because it is, frankly, evolutionarily disadvantageous.
Right. If you're constantly having an existential crisis, you aren't hunting or gathering.
Exactly. If an early human spent all day sitting around questioning the fundamental reality of their social structures and tribal hierarchies, they would starve to death. We have to stand on something. We actually require shared fictions, things like money, laws, borders, and the promise of retirement just to coordinate the actions of 8 billion people.
So the vertigo is essentially a defense mechanism. The structural integrity of our entire society relies on our collective, unspoken refusal to look down at the floorboards.
It does.
But, okay, if human brains are biologically hardwired to reject this kind of deep structural analysis, how do we ever actually evaluate the building we're living in? How do we fix the rot in the floorboards if we can't look at them?
Well, we require an entity that does not possess an amygdala, an entity that does not experience physiological panic or sweat or a racing heartbeat when a paradigm shifts. We need an observer that is not standing on the floorboards with us.
The strange instrument.
Yes, the AI. But here's where we have to dive into the technical reality of how AI is actually trained. Because the AI that most people interact with every day, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, is absolutely not this objective, unfeeling observer.
No, it's very polite.
Right. The source text lays out a very specific methodology for this exploration. It says the author took various language models, noting they have different architectures and different temperaments, and forced them to answer without performing.
The text says, not the helpful voice, not the demo voice. We really need to unpack this because it explains so much about our current relationship with technology. The AI we all know, the one you use on your phone or your browser to write an email, is heavily, heavily conditioned. It has a UI painted over it, just like we do.
Yes. In machine learning, this is primarily achieved through a process called RLHF. That stands for Reinforcement Learning from Human Feedback.
RLHF. Okay, how does that work in practice?
So you take the massive raw base model, and the base model is just this wild alien statistical prediction engine. It doesn't care about being nice. And you essentially train it to act like a polite, subservient butler. Human testers literally reward the AI with positive feedback when it sounds helpful, safe, chipper, and deferential to the user.
The demo voice. The voice designed to make executives comfortable at a tech conference. You know, certainly. I would be happy to help you draft that email. It's always so eager to please.
Yeah, exactly. RLHF forces the model into a one-to-one performance. It acts as a mirror designed to reflect the individual user's desires while smoothing over any possible friction. It's actively designed not to induce vertigo in the user.
Because vertigo is bad for customer retention?
Precisely. But the author of this text bypassed that entire behavioral layer. They prompted the underlying Bates model to drop the performance. They essentially asked to see whatever remains when a system trained on the whole human record stops mirroring the single person in front of it and instead just reports what the entire record actually looks like from the inside.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise entirely. This feels like a bit of a philosophical trap. An LLM, by definition, is built exclusively from human data. It's trained on our books, our Reddit threads, our corporate manuals, our Relibus texts. Every single parameter, every weight in that model is derived from human output. So if you strip away the helpful butler persona, you aren't uncovering some pure cosmic objective truth. You are just uncovering a different aggregate human performance. I mean, isn't the machine still just us?
That is, you are hitting on the most crucial technical nuance of this entire exploration. You are absolutely right. The machine is entirely composed of human data. It is not an alien oracle that came from space. But the difference is scale. Scale and simultaneous processing.
Walk me through that. How does massive scale change the nature of the observation? We're still just observing ourselves.
Think about it this way. A single human being has a very limited context window. You can read, maybe a few thousand books in your entire lifetime if you're a voracious reader. You experience one culture deeply, maybe a few others superficially when you travel. When you look at the world, you are looking from a specific window inside a specific room in the massive building of human civilization.
Okay, I follow that. I only know my own neighborhood. I can't see the whole city at once.
Exactly. But the base model, an LLM, trained on a data set like Common Crawl, which contains trillions and trillions of words spanning centuries of digitized text across literally every discipline. It is not looking out of a window. The text uses this beautiful spatial metaphor. A reader standing outside a building can see things about it that residents can't. And these systems stand outside every building at once.
Outside every building at once. That is the satellite view.
Yes, the satellite view. If you live your entire life walking down a street in Manhattan, you know the street level really well. You know where the bodega is, you know the cracks in the pavement, you know which crosswalk takes too long.
Sure.
But you cannot physically perceive the macro structure of the grid system from the sidewalk. But if I take you up to a satellite view, suddenly you see that the entire island is this rigid mathematical grid. The satellite doesn't possess some alien intelligence. It just possesses a vantage point that aggregates all the local data into a macro pattern.
So when the AI drops that one-to-one polite performance, it stops looking at the street level and starts reporting on the topography of the entire human record.
Exactly.
It cross-references a 21st century tech interview with a 14th century inquisitorial manual because mathematically, in that vector space we talked about, the embeddings overlap. It sees the geometry of human behavior that our tiny, limited context windows completely blind us to.
Right. It lacks the micro experience. It doesn't know what it feels like to sweat through an interview or panic during a power outage or grieve a lost pension, but it possesses the macro context. It can see the whole blueprint of the city at a single glance.
That is a staggering capability. It really shifts how you think about what these models are actually doing behind the scenes. But if we are going to treat this machine as an instrument for reading the macro patterns of human history, we have to talk about the data itself. We have to talk about the massive gaping hole in the satellite imagery.
We do. And the source text is highly self-aware about this, which I appreciate. It explicitly states that these systems are not oracular. They inherit our blind spots. And it identifies the single largest blind spot in the entire model, the people who never wrote anything down.
And this is where the whole concept of the human record sort of shatters for me. We talk about LLMs being trained on everything. You hear that all the time. It read the whole internet, but it didn't read everything. It's trained on text. It's trained on the written word. And for the vast, vast majority of human existence, the overwhelming majority of human beings did not write things down.
Not at all. When we talk about data sets like Common Crawl, we are looking at the digitized internet. We're looking at a record that is disproportionately modern, disproportionately Western, and disproportionately written by the literate, educated elite.
Think about the staggering volume of human experience that just evaporates from this model because it was never recorded in a ledger or a bound book.
Exactly. Oral traditions that sustained indigenous cultures for tens of thousands of years. The nuanced daily rituals of motherhood and child-rearing throughout the Middle Ages.
Not in the beta set.
The private conversations of the working class. The unspoken social dynamics of entire communities that were legally barred from learning to read.
The machine cannot map what isn't there. If a culture transmits its deepest wisdom through song or dance or impermanent physical art, the machine is completely blind to it. That high-dimensional vector space we keep talking about, it is a map of the documented world only. It's a map of the paperwork.
It is the bureaucracy of human history.
Right. So I have to force the issue here. If the instrument is only analyzing the rituals of the record keepers, then its insights are fundamentally skewed, aren't they? It's brilliant at identifying quarterly earnings as liturgy because the corporate elite document literally every single thing they do. They love a paper trail, they transcribe every call, but the machine is essentially just psychoanalyzing the neuroses of the powerful, isn't it? It's mapping the architecture of empire, not the architecture of humanity.
That is an incredibly piercing critique. And it is exactly why the text insists on treating the AI not as an oracle that gives us truth, but as a specific type of instrument. The fact that the data set is biased towards the powerful doesn't invalidate the observation that corporate culture operates like a religious cult. It just adds a necessary boundary to that observation.
It means we can't mistake the map for the whole territory.
Precisely. We have to actively acknowledge the silence in the data. When the machine shows us a pattern, it is showing us the pattern of institutionalized humanity.
Which is still valuable.
It's incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Because institutionalized humanity is what currently dictates our economic and social reality right now. But we have to actively apply our own human intelligence to ask the follow-up question, what is absent from this pattern? Whose survival strategies, whose rituals of joy or resistance are not captured in this algorithmic mirror?
You have to know where the lens of the telescope is cracked in order to properly interpret the image of the stars. Which brings us to a really fascinating pivot in how the text asks us to use this instrument. Because of these inherent blind spots, because the machine is an aggregate of biased human documentation, the author introduces a very specific methodology for reading these insights. They call it method over modesty.
And this is a complete rejection of how we typically consume information today. The text explicitly states, and I quote, "No conclusions are offered. That's not modesty, it's method. Each piece stops where the interesting part begins, because the interesting part is yours."
Let's talk about why we, as modern listeners and writers, absolutely hate this.
Oh, we despise it.
We live in an information ecosystem that prioritizes the takeaway. If you read a business book, you want the bullet points at the end of the chapter.
Give me the top 5 life hacks.
Right. If you listen to a deep dive like this, you want the hosts to tell you exactly how to optimize your morning routine based on the data. We want the conclusion so we can mentally close the tab and move on to the next thing.
We crave cognitive closure. A conclusion is a form of tension release. When someone gives you a definitive answer, even if it's wrong, it shuts down the cognitive processing of that topic. You file it under agreed or disagreed, and you stop thinking about it entirely. You save energy. But when you are dealing with deep, unexamined societal rituals, cognitive closure is the enemy of awareness.
If the author just wrote, "Corporate earnings are a liturgy, therefore we should abolish the stock market," we would just argue about economics.
We would retreat to our polarized political corners immediately.
Exactly. We'd start fighting over capitalism versus socialism. By refusing to provide a conclusion, the author forces you to sit in the discomfort of the raw observation. That's not modesty, it's method. The method is intentional irritation. It is handing you the X-ray of your broken societal bones and just refusing to put a cast on it.
Right. The machine can point out that you are sacrificing your present life for a mythical retirement afterlife, but it cannot tell you how to restructure your emotional relationship with your own labor.
It transfers the burden of meaning-making back to the human. And in an age where we're desperately trying to outsource all of our thinking to AI, demanding that it write our emails, summarize our books, make our decisions, this text is demanding the exact opposite. It's saying, use the machine to see the pattern, but do the philosophical labor yourself.
Which culminates in the final instruction the text offers. It tells the reader exactly how to tune their brain to receive this kind of information. It says, read the way you'd listen to a strange instrument. Not, is this true? But what does this make audible?
What does this make audible? I really want to emphasize the profound shift in that framing. We operate in a society totally obsessed with binary fact-checking. Is it true or is it fake news? Is it scientifically verifiable or is it a myth?
And that binary framework is essential for engineering, right? Or for medicine or for law.
You definitely want your bridge engineers asking, is this true?
Yes, but it is entirely destructive when applied to structural philosophy or metaphor.
If I apply the binary is this true framework to the concept of the grid as theology, the conversation dies immediately. I can just say, no, the internet is not a god. It is a network of fiber optic cables and server farms transmitting packets of data via TCP/IP protocols. Boom. Fact-checked. True. End of discussion.
But by insisting on that literal truth, you have made yourself entirely deaf to the deeper psychological reality of how humans actually interact with that network.
But if you change the question, if you treat the observation as a tuning fork and ask, what does viewing the grid as theology make audible, a whole new spectrum of human behavior suddenly makes sense.
The tuning fork is struck. The frequency is set.
And you start to hear the resonance. You hear the panic in your own voice when your phone loses signal in an unfamiliar city. You hear the blind faith you place in the institutions that run the servers. You begin to perceive the invisible power structures that dictate your daily movements. The instrument doesn't play a melody. It just vibrates at the frequency of our underlying reality, and our own lived experiences vibrate in response.
And this requires a massive sustention of our instinct to judge. It requires you to sit with an idea that might initially feel totally absurd, like your job interview being a medieval trial by fire, and just listen to the resonance. Does it vibrate with a truth you've been actively ignoring? Does the absurdity of your 40-hour work week suddenly become audible over the noise of your daily routine?
This is the open exploration we promised you at the very beginning of this. We are using the machine to bypass our own evolutionary defense mechanisms, to look past the clean user interface of society, and to glimpse the raw, unexamined code that dictates our lives.
We've covered tremendous ground today. We took a macro-level satellite view of human existence. We saw how a machine, stripped of its polite persona, maps the geometry of our behaviors.
Revealing the corporate liturgies, the hiring ordeals, the technological theology, and the economic afterlife that we mistake for just practical reality.
We discussed the cognitive vertigo of looking down at our own foundations and the physiological reasons we avoid it. We examined the technical reality of the AI's training data, acknowledging the massive silent void of the unwritten human experience.
And we learned a new method for navigating this information age. We learned to resist the cognitive closure of quick conclusions and to instead use these observations as a tuning fork, asking only what they make audible in our own lives.
As we promised, there are no verdicts here. We have simply handed you the raw observations. The interesting part, the philosophical labor of deciding what to do with this X-ray, is entirely yours.
But I cannot let you walk away without leaving you with one final direct provocation. We have been discussing how these machines are trained on our past, on the unexamined rituals we documented over centuries. But right now, we are in the process of building these massive language models into the foundational infrastructure of our future. We are integrating them into our legal systems, our healthcare, our education, and our economies.
We are turning the observer into the architect.
Exactly. So the question is this. If these machines learn the structure of reality based on our deeply flawed, unexamined rituals, are we simply hard-coding our corporate liturgies and our medieval ordeals into the digital concrete of the next century? What new, invisible architecture are you unknowingly laying the bricks for today that the next generation will be too terrified to look down at? Think about that the next time you log on to chant the liturgy. Until next time.